So I'm 23, I'm from the UK, I run a faceless YouTube channel called Wi-Fi Uni with 25,000 subscribers, and it makes me around $2 grand a month. And today I want to talk about a question I think is one of the most practically useful things I can share, which is exactly how I decide what videos to make. Because I think the video selection process is where a lot of channels go wrong without realizing it. And I want to walk through the actual thinking I use rather than the generic advice about making content you're passionate about following trends. Please excuse this AI slob voice. I promise the value in this video is worth it. And I want to start by saying that the video selection process is probably the highest leverage thing you do as a creator. Like, the difference between a video that gets 10,000 views and one that gets 500 views is often not in the execution, it's in the idea. And picking the right idea before you start writing a word of script is worth more than any amount of effort you put into the production afterwards. And what I mean by the right idea is not just an interesting idea or a timely idea. It's an idea that has genuine search demand behind it, that fits the audience you've built, that you can execute well within your format, and that has the potential to bring in new viewers rather than just serving the existing subscribers. And finding ideas that tick all those boxes is the thing I spend the most time thinking about, even though it doesn't look like work from the outside. So the first thing in my process is search research. And I want to be specific about how I actually do this, because I think vague advice about doing keyword research is not very useful without the specifics. What I do is go into YouTube search and type the beginning of a phrase that's relevant to my niche, something like how to make money with, or best AI tools for, or how to grow a YouTube, and then look at what YouTube auto-completes, because the auto-complete suggestions are based on actual search volume, like YouTube is suggesting those completions because a lot of people are typing them. And that's a direct signal of what people are looking for. And then I look at the results for the most promising searches, and I'm assessing two things. First, whether there's genuine search volume, which the autocomplete already suggests. And second, whether the existing videos are actually serving that search well. Like, are the top results good videos that fully answer what the searcher is looking for? Or are they decent but leaving something on the table? And if they're leaving something on the table, that's where my video goes. The thing I'm looking for is the gap between what people are searching for and what they're currently finding. And the bigger that gap, the bigger the opportunity for a video that fills it properly. The second thing I look at is what's performing well on similar channels. And I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I'm not talking about copying other people's content. I'm talking about reading the data that other channels have already generated to understand what the audience responds to. Like, if I see a video on a similar channel that has significantly more views than that channel's average, that's useful information about what resonated. And the question I ask is, why did this specific video do better than their others? And usually the answer is in the title or the premise, like the topic was more specific, or the angle was more counterintuitive, or the title made a stronger promise. And I can take that learning and apply it to my own ideas without making the same video. And I also look at comment sections on well-performing videos in my niche, not to steal ideas, but to understand what questions people still have after watching. Because unanswered questions in the comments of a popular video are basically a brief for a follow-up video that the market is already telling you it wants. The third thing is what I'd call the angle test. And this is probably the part of my process that's hardest to explain, but most important to get right. And what I mean by the angle test is that any given topic can be approached from multiple angles, and most of those angles are boring and one or two of them are genuinely interesting. Like a video about how to get sponsors on YouTube is a topic, but the angle you take on that topic is what makes it interesting or not. And the boring angle is just a walkthrough of the process. Here's how to pitch brands, here's what to include in a media kit, here are some email templates, and that video exists 1,000 times already, and adding another one doesn't give the viewer a reason to watch mine specifically. The interesting angle is something that contradicts the conventional wisdom, or tells a specific story, or makes a counterintuitive point that reframes how the viewer thinks about the whole thing. Like, I got my first sponsor at 1,000 subscribers and made $50 and massively undersold myself, and here's what I learned from that. And that angle is specific and honest and tells the viewer something they couldn't get from the generic version. So for every topic I'm considering, I try to find the angle that makes mine worth watching specifically. And if I can't find that angle, I either don't make the video or I keep thinking until I find one. The fourth thing is the format fit. And what I mean by that is whether the topic works in my specific format, like a faceless educational channel with an AI voiceover, works really well for some types of content and not so well for others. And understanding that constraint helps me filter out ideas that seem good in theory but would be difficult to execute well. The format works best for content that's primarily informational, like explaining how something works, breaking down a process, sharing an observation with supporting reasoning, and it works less well for content that relies heavily on personality or emotion or spontaneous conversation, and I've made the mistake of trying to make the second type of video in my format, and it just doesn't land as well as the first type. So part of the idea selection process is just asking whether this idea plays to the strengths of my format and filtering out the ones that don't, not because they're bad ideas, but because they're bad ideas for this specific channel. The fifth thing is what I'd call the audience match test, and this is slightly different to the search demand question, because something can have search demand without being a good fit for the specific audience that's already subscribed to the channel. And what I mean by audience match is whether the video serves the same person who subscribed based on the previous videos. Like if someone subscribed because they watched a video about making money with AI tools, and I then make a video about something only loosely related, that subscriber might watch it out of loyalty, but they probably won't find it as useful. And a series of off-topic videos is how you build an audience that's less engaged and less valuable to sponsors. So I try to make sure that each video I make would be genuinely useful to the same person who found value in the last one, and that constraint actually makes the idea selection easier rather than harder because it narrows the field of options to the ones that are most likely to perform well with the specific audience I've built. And the last thing I want to say is about volume of ideas, because I think people sometimes struggle to come up with ideas and treat that as a sign that they've run out of things to say. And in my experience, that's almost never true in a niche like AI and making money online, where the subject matter keeps expanding. The way I keep the ideas flowing is just having a running list that I add to whenever something occurs to me, like an observation from an analytics pattern, a question someone asked in the comments, something I read that made me think of an angle, a gap I noticed in the content that exists, and I capture all of those things in the moment rather than trying to hold them in my head. And by the time I sit down to plan the next week of content, there are always more ideas on the list than I have time to make. And I think the habit of capturing ideas as they come is just as important as the process of evaluating them, because ideas are perishable in the sense that they feel obvious in the moment and then impossible to remember later. And a creator who captures everything and then filters has more to work with than one who tries to evaluate ideas in real time and only writes down the ones that immediately feel strong. 2 years in, hundreds of videos, and I still sit down to plan content and find the list is longer than the week. And I think that's a function of being genuinely interested in the niche and paying attention to it rather than any special creative gift. And I think most people in a niche they're genuinely interested in have more ideas than they think if they start capturing them consistently. If you want more direct help with any part of building a faceless channel, I do have a school community linked in the description. There's one-to-one feedback available depending on which tier you join. No pressure at all. Cheers for watching.